Hey, 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 hey. Top of the morning again. Well, I guess it's not top of the morning. Mid of the morning again to you all. Is that you, Jeffon?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
Mid of the morning to you.
Mid of the morning.
Mid of the morning. Good mid of the morning to you, Center for Spiritual Living, Palm Desert, and friends all over this beautiful planet of ours. So grateful to be back with you for our Tuesday session. It's a good day. It's a good day. Why? Because I say so. That's why. Power of intention, right? I read something yesterday, Jeffon. It was in one of the 14 books that I'm reading simultaneously. So I, basically read, except for the book that we're reading, I read like a page a day if I'm studying something. But it was just this wonderful reminder of, I'm not a morning guy, but there was this passage. My clock generally sweeps more toward the evening. I feel more creative at night and things like that. But it was this. So, when the alarm goes off or when it's time to get up, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge for me. But, 5-10 minutes after I'm out of bed, I'm rocking and rolling and good to go. But the passage said something to the effect of, when you wake up, understand that your life today is about making a substantive contribution to humanity. Mm-hmm. Not just, I got to go about the the motions of it again. It's not the same day again. But today I have an opportunity to make a substantive contribution to humanity. How's that land for you, man? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of that saying, you can't do all the good the world needs, but you can do the world needs all the good that you can do.
Yes.
And it's easy for us to be caught up in this habitual reactive type state, waking up and coloring the canvas of our life the same way that we've colored it in the past. And to periodically pause and recognize that this moment is a true gift and one that will never unfold the way that it is right now.
Yeah.
It's such a humbling thing to recognize, and then also a level of responsibility for what you're going to do going forward.
Absolutely. Personal responsibility. And I love that he keeps talking about that in the book too. And we're going to get to chapter 8, behavior, in just a second. But I got a fender bender. It's a little bit more than that. A few weeks ago, I got rear-ended pretty hard. I think I mentioned that in one of our shows. But I'm going to pick my car up today from the shop. The repairs on it are done, and taking the rental car back. And I'm just thinking my day out, and I am committed to being a blessing to the folks at the rental car joint and at the fix-it shop. Just like those two opportunities, in addition to this opportunity that you and I have right now to have another rich, full, beautiful conversation. To hopefully, all of us together, and the folks that are tuning in and listening, that together collectively, we can be a blessing to each other, right? I mean, what a gift if we all wake up thinking like that. So, and that's that's some enthusiasm I'm bringing for the day. Let's just be a blessing all over each other, shall we?
That's great. Yeah, I'm with you.
Right on. With you. So we got chapter 8, behavior. You want to jump right in? Do you have some? Boom, baby.
There it is.
Chapter 8 this week.
Yeah. I have some slides. I've created a few.
Cool. Where do you want to take us? Yeah.
Well, I think, as always, beginning with some definitions, as he does, and I just want to say good morning. Annie said good morning, so good morning, Annie.
Good morning, Annie. Good morning,
so
all.
With that said, behavior. Yeah, we're moving through it. There's a part of me that wants to read more. But I've been going chapter by chapter because I know if I read far in advance, I will probably be thinking different ways than if I just take it step by step. So this has been a humbling process of patience and just letting it unfold naturally. So
right on.
With that being said, definitions that kind of help direct our conversation in this chapter. Behavioral racist, one who is making individuals responsible for the perceived behavior of racial groups and making racial groups responsible for the behavior of individuals. This was a deep chapter. Behavioral anti-racist, one who is making racial group behavior fictional and individual behavior real. Rev Charles, I think this was a very profound chapter for myself. And there, I could have probably filled up many slides of just a lot of words that I'll share some that I have. But as we dive into it, but as always, as we go through this conversation, we are honoring and recognizing the light that is dwelling within everybody, but and also recognizing the ways in which the world at times does not create that even playing field for everybody. And what can we do about it?
Yep.
So just kind of want to put that out there.
Amen.
Did those definitions kind of stand out to you, or?
I like how he makes it simple. You know, there's some parts of the book as I'm reading, I really resonate with, like, oh, that's a simple idea for me to grasp. Most of those are the definitions and then there's some complex ideas that he gets into as well, where I really have to wrestle with it, read it a few times, close the book, think on it. Mm-hmm. Where have I noticed this? How have I participated with it? How have I not participated with it? And just really metabolize it. So I love that he starts, and I think I say this every week, I really appreciate that he starts those chapters with those definitions to create that distinction.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So with that being said, let's move into it. Chapter 8, how to be an anti-racist. So a fascinating point that really stood out to me was this this concept that the civil rights generation usually invoked Martin Luther King Jr. to shame the younger generations, in terms of Martin Luther King didn't do all of this, didn't die for you so you can act a fool out here. And that's something that I've heard periodically throughout my experience. And then there is a saying that on page 93, it's not racist. It's not racist for whites to assert that the culture of welfare dependency, out of wedlock pregnancy, and absent fatherhood cannot be broken by social programs unless there is first more personal responsibility. I believe that was Clinton who said that. And so in this concept of, well, pointing at all these particular things and saying, well, you just need to embrace more personal responsibility, the author, Dr. Kendi, says it makes anti-racist sense to talk about the personal irresponsibility of individuals like him at that time, of all races. Right. And then he goes on to say, I could have studied harder. My white friends could have studied harder too, but their failures and irresponsibility didn't somehow tarnish their race. Right. Which leads me to this particular thing, and then I'll pause for a moment and we can discuss this.
I've got that one underlined too, man. Yep, absolutely. Oh yeah.
Connection. So on the bottom of page 93, one of racism's harms is the way it falls on the unexceptional Black person who was asked to be extraordinary just to survive. And even worse, the Black screw-up who faces the abyss after one error, while the white screw-up is handed second chances and empathy. This shouldn't be surprising. One of the fundamental values of racism to white people is that it makes success attainable for unexceptional whites. And then goes on to say, while success, even moderate success, is usually reserved for extraordinary Black people. Yep. And I'll pause there for a minute.
Well, I want to go back to something he said right before that as well. I don't think you said this is for the first part of your thing, and if you did, forgive me for saying the same thing.
No.
What he's talking about just before that, he said, there's no question he's talking about his personal story, could have hurdled that racism and kept on running. But asking every non-athletic Black person to become an Olympic hurdler and blaming them when they can't keep up is racist. And he's talking about trying harder in school, or, somehow, the ways that the racist systems are set up within his school, that all of a sudden you ask everybody because you think they're disposed in a certain way to be a certain way. You're setting that up for failure because you're not dealing with the individual on an individual basis. You're dealing with group, and there is no one group that 100% thinks or behaves or does life in any certain way all the time.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that is such a great point, and it's fascinating to think, because in this conversation we're using the book as a guide, but it's important that we also apply some things to ourselves and ask, in what ways have I participated in it or not participated in it? And from my perspective, this whole idea of attaching a particular behavior to an entire racial group, I mean, there have been times in throughout my life where I've done that, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Yep.
And then I would segment, oh, well, this exceptional individual in this group that I am stereotyping is an outlier and doesn't reflect what I believe to be true about the group itself.
Right.
And so it's bringing like almost a light of awareness that is often uncomfortable and leads to vulnerability because we're questioning the foundation or the bedrock for which a lot of our thought patterns stand upon.
Right. And even a statement like, and I cop to this as well, the statement or the idea that it doesn't align with my belief about this group as a whole is a racist statement, because we're talking about a belief as a group as a whole, not an individual and the individual merit. And forgive me, Jeffon, if I'm stepping on your toes. He says a couple lines later, in other words, I was a bad student, but I shouldn't be critiqued as a bad Black student.
Yes. And that is right there. I was a bad student, but shouldn't be critiqued as a bad Black student.
Yeah.
I did not represent my race any more than an irresponsible white classmates represented their race.
Right.
And then goes on to exactly what we just said. It makes racist sense to talk about personal irresponsibility as it applies to an entire racial group.
Yep.
So then he's touching upon important concepts that we've been discussing throughout this conversation. Racial group behavior is a figment of the racist imagination. Individuals' behaviors can shape the success of individuals, but policies determine the success of groups. And it is racist power that creates the policies that cause racial inequities. I thought that was it's really profound, Rev Charles, when we pause for a moment and honestly reflect on the various policies and the degrees to which those policies impact groups of people.
Yep.
And racial, socioeconomic, all these various dimensions of diversity that seem to separate us as humans.
Even body size, body shaming, things like that.
A variety of things, yeah.
Yep.
But it's like, I had this thought this morning when I woke up. So today I did a workshop with an organization in Utah around resilience and things of that sort. And I usually get up extremely early when I'm doing presentations just to go through my spiritual practice. But I had this thought that has been really hitting my heart. And it's like, do we as humans actually believe that we cannot create peace with other humans if a particular individual, a particular group, a particular political body, a particular religious following says that we cannot have peace? So is our peace or our well-being or our harmony dependent upon what somebody who we perceive to be as an authority figure says, okay, now it's possible? And I'm kind of scattering this out right now as I'm saying it, but
I think I'm following.
I'm just like, man, peace is possible. And we at this moment right now do not have to wait for another person to say, well, okay, now both parties are willing to participate together. Our peace isn't dependent, our well-being, our harmony, our connection to other humans is not dependent upon what's happening out there. It's what we're choosing to do in here. I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it, but it popped up in my mind this morning.
Yeah, no, that's a worthy wrestling match for sure. I get it. I hear it. And I think if we bring it back to principle, Jeffon, not only is peace possible, but it's the natural order of things. But I think it brings it, and what that informs how, and that's not being, I'm not putting my head in the sand. I'm aware of what's happening, but each of our individual responsibility as well is to create peace here. And that's when we experience peace. And that can be a tough pill to swallow when we look at if an authority has power over you, seemingly has power over you, take away your rights, privileges, whatever they might be, what you have access to, you can easily feel like a victim. And I've had moments where it doesn't have anything to do with race, but it has to do with power and strength. where I felt like I didn't have sovereignty or control over my own life, where I still deal with remnants of being a victim, which creates anger, rage sometimes within me, where I'm not at peace at all. And that's when I start kind of spinning.
Right.
And what I have to bring myself back to is that, okay, I have control over this. What can I do right now in this moment to reconcile that, at least in this moment, and bring myself back to the principle of peace? And that where peace exists, the only peace that I can be responsible for is the one that's happening right here. So I think it's a great wrestling match. But again, I just keep coming back to, there is no such thing as world peace. There's no such thing as world peace until there actually is world peace. There's personal peace. There's 7.8 billion people or whatever experiencing personal peace, which then equates to world peace.
Right. Right.
If we start trying, I believe this, if we keep trying to attain world peace, we're bypassing what we need to do right here to create world peace.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point. And I was having a conversation with some of my friends who are walking down a different religious path, and they were talking about the second coming. And I was saying, well, what if Christ is a consciousness, and the way in which Christ returns is by way of each of us individually transforming ourselves into that consciousness. And that is the second coming. And then it didn't go the way I thought, but it was a good conversation.
Who's this clown? What idea is this?
No, man. Oh, you need to be saved, man. I'll pray for you. And then I go in to say, well, there's no hell. And then they don't know what to say after that.
I'll pray for you.
I have one thing that I'm going to be kind of critiquing this particular statement from my perspective of personal irresponsibility.
Okay.
Because I often say, and I'm thinking about the way in which things can transform, and not dismissing policies and particular structures that have been put in place that have oppressed groups of people for quite some time. But there is a part of me that firmly believes that the ability to embrace 100% personal responsibility and accountability will lead towards a more empowered consciousness that will transform the circumstances that one would call their reality. Now, making that connection from being responsible and being willing, as you put it, to not necessarily be a victim, though you may be victimized, but not to allow that become your identity. Suddenly, maybe that's a large leap for individuals of all backgrounds to reach. And I know for myself, if you would have told me 10 years ago, like, no, you're personally responsible. I know it may be an uneven playing field out there, but look, man, you can be successful in spite of that, and you are 100% responsible for the way you show up in the world. And that would have fell on ears that just tune that out. But now I'm in a place where I believe there's something that resonates with me, that is the solution. And so when I read that idea of personal irresponsibility, it just kind of prompted me to say that and share that with you.
Yeah, amen. Well, look, what we have is our collection of beliefs, which create our perception or paradigm of the life that we're living in. Now, whether we want to agree with that or not or each other, that's where a wonderful conversation and dialogue can come from. But at the end of the day, what else do we have except our paradigm? And either we're willing to have that shift, like, hey, what if the second coming of Christ was actually as your consciousness, to just be willing to entertain that? Or am I so locked into this is the way it is? So as a student of truth, I would encourage everybody, whether your immediate reaction is to disagree with a statement or agree with a statement, at least chew on it for a minute. At least chew on it for a minute, see what it tastes like in your consciousness. So the idea that personal responsibility or personal irresponsibility. I mean, look, I didn't grow up in the best of circumstances either. And I actually relate to him in so many ways as I'm reading this book. I was a bad student too. I was more into like my friends and sports and things like this also. And looking back in the same way that he does, I could have studied harder.
Yeah, me too.
I could have spent more time in the book. Absolutely. It wasn't, school was never my cup of tea, man. You know, it just was. So anyway, yeah, yeah. What ultimately, what do we have if we're giving responsibility for our lives over to something or somebody else? Then what are we left with? We're not left with a life in my estimation. What are we left with?
Yeah, yeah. And it seems as if when the external world, when we're at the mercy of the external world, then internal peace seems always out of reach. And we'll always be at the mercy. But anyways, okay.
Yeah.
So a few things.
We have some comments that popped up.
Yeah, it's a very human thing to hold on to stories that we are told or we tell ourselves that seem to make sense of this complicated world. And then a very good point about world peace that you mentioned. I second that. Okay, so so moving right along here. So this is on page 95. Every time someone racializes behavior and describes something as Black behavior, they're expressing a racist idea. To be an anti-racist is to recognize there is no such thing as racial behavior. To be an anti-racist is to recognize there's no such thing as Black behavior, let alone irresponsible Black behavior. And then in the middle of page 95, he talks about no evidence has ever been produced, for instance, to prove that Black people are louder or angrier, nicer, funnier, lazier, less punctual, more immoral, religious or dependent, that Asians are more subservient, that whites are greedier. All we have are stories of individual behavior, but individual stories are only proof of the behavior of individuals. Just as race doesn't exist biologically, race doesn't exist behaviorally. And I thought that was powerful when he then leads into the idea that anti-racism means separating the idea of culture from the idea of behavior and also recognizing individuals for who and what they are. I shared a lot there. That was a lot of talking on my end.
Here's case in point about, well, anyway, I don't know what it's case in point of, but I've had the thought a few times now, so I'm going to share it.
Yeah.
I'm white, you're Black. We're underlining the exact same passages in this book. So that's just evidence of, what is it, one mind, not, of just the connection and what's potent. I don't even know why I'm saying that, except, hey, you know what? It's an example of harmony to me right now is what it is. He says there's no Black gene. Yeah, there's no Black disposition to anything. There's no white disposition to anything. And what did he talk about? Was it in the first couple of chapters that there's humanity?
Yeah.
That there's humanity. And he keeps bringing it back to individualization,
right,
which keeps making me think of what Ernest Holmes talked about, that there's one power and presence individualized as each one of us, as a distinct expression of that one power and presence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just love that we continue with each statement, unraveling the idea that there is. It actually makes me in this moment think of Black Thought from the Roots, like his name is Black Thought.
yeah, right.
But, I mean, so is that a racist name that he has then? Is Black Thought? I mean,
right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, what would Professor Kendi say about that, or Dr. Kendi say about that? Right. And I know why he named himself Black Thought. I get it, 100%. Mm-hmm. I love him as a lyricist, as a human being, as everything.
Right.
But in light of this, what does that make his name? It's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder what he'd say about that. Hey, Black Thought, if somehow we can get a message to you, will you come on the show with Jeffon and I, just so we can?
Yes, please.
That would be something else.
Yeah. Well, then I think of that, and I often say when I'm speaking, I'm like, well, if we think about Blackness or darkness in general, metaphorically, a seed has to be put into the darkness of soil before it reaches to the light. the earth is brought into existence by the infinite seemingly darkness of the universe, for which
Yes.
planets are brought forth. All of us spent the first 5 to 9 months in the darkness of our mother's womb before we were birthed out into the light. Studies have shown that the human race began in Africa, which is predominantly dark skin, to bring out the beautiful array of individuals we have today. And so maybe that idea of black thought is the depths for which thoughts even exist, which is the infinite realm of consciousness that could either be seen as all light or all darkness, but it's not darkness in the sense of bad. It's darkness in the sense of creation.
Yes.
I don't know. That's a
Yeah, you do. I mean, I can imagine him saying yes.
Yeah. Yes,
Right on.
freestyle it for us.
Freestyle it for us. All right.
There was a thought that I had. A great practice then would be for all of us to begin to ask ourselves, how do we participate in attaching behaviors to a certain group of people or certain racial groups of individuals? Have there been a time, or has there been a time in my life where, and I'm just speaking in general, has there been a time in my life where I thought, well, yeah, this group of people are louder. Man, these guys don't, I mean, they're needy. These people are dependent on the system. Oh, these people are extremely good at math.
Yep.
These people are CEO types. And
Yep.
how do we participate in that, often unconsciously, that fuels and perpetuates the very system or structure that we've been speaking, not against, but speaking to transform?
Well, I know. I mean, I know over the years of my life, I try and be more mindful of it now. And I've heard people say, well, it's only a stereotype because it's true.
Yes.
Okay. These people, well, we don't need to keep going down the line of everything. I think we get it. But I know before I participated with those things, but then to start to wake up, and what he continues to ask us to wake up to is individual behavior. Right. And not group behavior. But I think when we take inventory, it helps us to wake up to that. I mean, blacks are better athletes, right? Whites are smarter. He illuminates some of these things.
Yeah.
Some of the things, Asian people don't know how to drive. Jeff says, I have sent Black Thought a message. Sweet.
Yes.
Or I don't know if that's Jeff or whoever's helping staff us today. I love that. What else? What's the end of that message say?
And he said, good morning. We're discussing on the show a book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and your name is involved in the conversation. We want to know if you'd be willing to join us on our live show Tuesday, the 8th of September at 10 a.m. Pacific.
Love that.
Hey, it's all possible.
It's all possible. I love that.
Yeah, one mind.
One mind. So yeah, but I think that's a call to wake up. It's a call to wake up. Like, what good do I get out of generalizing? What does it keep me safe? What does it do? Does it keep my paradigm in order? Make me feel superior? So that I somehow have an illusion of power, or somehow that I'm better because of it? Why would we do those types of things?
It would seem as if it continues to create that racial hierarchy that he's describing as well, and that we've talked about in the past, where it is establishing dominion or superiority over those who you perceive to be less than or not as good. And this is a practice that I think we all could engage in as we go throughout the week to catch ourselves mentally when we participate in that, whether we're watching something on the news or on TV, or driving through the neighborhood, or driving through our town, and catch ourselves when we are participating in that. Not saying we act out on all of those things that flow through our mind, but at least standing guard at the doorway of our consciousness, so to say.
Yes. And to not pretend, like I'm just even noticing right now, man, full disclosure in this moment, that even when I was starting to say some of those other stereotypes or groupings, of this because that, or they because of whatever their culture is, I get a little bit nervous about offending somebody, even though those things run rampant in our society. Mm-hmm. They run those types of stereotypes And until we call them out from a place of truth, they're just going to keep running because we're saying it's not okay to do that. You know, it almost makes me want to list all the ways that somehow that I've participated in those things and like draw a big X through it just in consciousness so I can keep moving in the direction of a human being is a human being, an individual is an individual. And all those other things are constructs based in nothing except what some group of people or whoever, one race-based group decided to make a truth about another race-based group for whatever reason, power, some of the other things I mentioned. But just to start openly, publicly, like just telling the truth about all the ones that I've noticed that exist, to start ushering us, you know, along, moving us along from participating with those things.
I'm with you. And it's a continuous thing. I mean, you can always catch yourself and bring yourself back to principle. And particularly if we begin to ask ourselves, well, in what ways have I not been willing to see the inherent worth of all humans today? And where was that at?
And for me to keep addressing any shame I have about where those things show up, that would prevent me from addressing them because I don't want to feel any shame.
Yes.
But not making it about shame, making it about growth, making it about learning, making it about awakening. That I don't have to be ashamed of anything. I may have participated with something, but I don't have to be ashamed about it now. I can be free from it. But as long as there's shame, there's an attachment to it, which keeps me from being free.
Yeah, that is such a powerful point. Yeah, that should be perhaps an exercise that we do. I'm willing to be open and transparent about the ways that it plays out for me. But yeah, I like that. Rep Charles. Maybe we can have a conversation about that.
Yeah. That let's push it down the road.
Yeah. Late. We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we got this all figured out right now. Everybody knows that, right? Helpful Settler said, I meditate daily to experience inner peace. Meditation is such a powerful process and practice. And, you know, today in my presentation or training that I did, I was talking, you know, imagine if we're able to meditate without our eyes closed. That's like where I can maintain this state of continuous peace while being aware of the reality, but meditating without necessarily having to sit down, eyes closed. There is a time and place for that. But can I walk in my life be a meditation, an active meditation?
Amen. Praying without ceasing is another way it's been said as well. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yes.
That you live in. I love that, Jeffon. Amen.
Yes.
Right on.
All right. Well, you know, we're already 33 minutes into this, so
what? The time court. Okay, let's.
We have a few more slides.
Come on, Black Thought.
Yes. Chime in. So I kind of bounced around on this, so you might need to help me piece it together. But he was basically talking about this idea of there is a thin line between an anti-racist saying that individual Blacks have suffered trauma and a racist saying Blacks are traumatized people by way of slavery he's talking about. And there's similarly a thin line between an anti-racist saying slavery was debilitating and a racist saying Blacks are debilitated people.
Right.
And on the bottom of page 97, and I'm not going to read this, but he just kind of highlights some of the first Black cities and communities after races or after slavery, and the ways in which they organized and built incredible communities and towns and entrepreneurialism, church building, government, and all of these type of things, which really begin to show this contrast of trauma. Are they traumatized? And I say they as Black folks, and slavery, and saying, well, did that really debilitate them? And I just thought it was such a powerful point because in American history, they don't often tell us this, but there are so many incredible Black communities that have been built or were built in the past. I mean, we think of even Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was bombed in, I think, 1921 by the American government because this community was flourishing of Black people. They had everything set up. And
I hadn't heard of that. I hadn't heard of. Can you say more about? That's fascinating. I didn't know about Black Wall Street. Wow.
Yeah, so this was a place of Black excellence, so to say, or just a Black community, and they had everything was Black owned because obviously segregation, and they were in Oklahoma.
Mhm.
Banks, schools, bus systems, government was set up. Everything that you can think, every facet of something that you would see in a typical or traditional, what we learned to be American town in the early 1900s.
Mhm.
This place was absolutely booming, and the American government uh, had some disagreements with that level of affluence afforded to a particular group of people who they deemed as inferior and not as capable, and actually bombed it,
Wow.
blew everything up. And that is something that I didn't learn about till I was maybe, junior year in college.
Hmm.
And that should be a, a fundamental piece of American history, as should the true history around Native Americans and the connection that natives and African had at that time, in the way in which they worked together to try to stand up against oppression that is completely missing from a lot of our traditional educational systems.
Hmm.
So Black
Amen.
Wall Street, yeah, I would encourage you to look into that,
I
Charles. I
will.
think you'd
I
really
abs-
like that.
Thanks for bringing it up. I absolutely will. Thanks for schooling me.
Another great book to add to the 14-year reading is a is a book called Black Indian, and that is a historical um, conversation and literature around the ways in which a lot of the native communities would assist runaway slaves and take them into their communities or into their tribes or their nation, so to say, and allow them to be able to flourish there,
Hmm.
which is another piece of history that doesn't make the connection when we think about traditional American history.
Right on. Cool. Thank you for those. Yeah, right on.
Definitely.
So back to what you were saying about and so I think that section started with this whole idea of PTSS, right? Post-traumatic
Yes.
slavery. Uh,
Yes.
uh, that this author, Joy DeGruy, built on the idea of PTSD, PTSS, and that somehow the entire race of Black people are generationally debilitated because of slavery.
Yes.
When, as you've already mentioned, there's been so much success of individuals and groups of individuals within the Black community um, that don't have anything to do with PTSS or something that might be debilitating. He's trying to debunk that whole thing, that idea, and again, bring it back to the idea of, I just like, what are you capable of? Like, everybody's capable of infinite amount of awesomeness.
Hmm.
It's just, we need to be aware of it, right? Which isn't to discount the horrific things that have happened. It's to be aware of that. And again, it's just a common thing. Bring it back to the individual level. And what are you responsible? And what power do you have now over your own life?
Right. Right. And I have a conversation with my wife often about, Native communities. And as I mentioned, she's a Lakota in the Dakotas. And the way in which it seems as if there is this continuous conversation of trauma. And I have to be completely aware, and I would be ignorant to ignore it, that Native Americans weren't able to practice their spirituality until the mid 70s. If they were caught doing it, they would be put in the federal penitentiary, which meant that a lot of their spiritual leaders who continued their Sundance or the various traditions that they had, even in Nipis, sweat lodges, would be jailed. And there's a lot of conversation that I have with my Native friends around this historical trauma. And this conversation in this particular chapter made me begin to ask, have I been participating in this idea that it's a traumatized people,
Hmm.
a traumatized group? Or is there a fine line, as he says, where I recognize, how did he put it there? Or is
Great.
there this fine line that saying that individual blacks or individual natives have suffered trauma versus saying they're traumatized people.
Yep.
It's something that I'm still working through, and that was something that was prompted up.
Yep.
Hey, Rep Charles,
Whether it's native folks or black folks or white folks,
any people,
you know, any people. What's the difference between, you know, the folks that have had traumatizing events in their life, whatever color you are? What is the fundamental difference between the person that's found some sort of success and peace and the person that has let their life fall apart, if you will? What's the difference between somebody that's lost their life, that's been traumatized, that's lost their life to alcoholism versus the person that's put their energy and attention into being a good parent and building a business and et cetera, et cetera?
right?
What's the difference there? What is that? That's rhetoric, but what is that too? Is it somehow we've caught an idea of self-worth? Somehow we've caught an idea that it can be better, and so I want to move in the direction of that betterness? Somehow has the trauma of an individual led just they become stuck in I'm worth less or I'm not capable of anything, rather than a group of people? What's the difference?
Right. Yeah.
And there is some sort of difference there, I assert.
Yes, I would agree. There is let's see, a comment also on November 10th, 1898, white supremacist murders African Americans in Wilmington, North Carolina, and deposed the elected Reconstruction era government. Yeah, I mean, there are so many things. And I saw this phrase where talking about like riots and looting, and it's like, you know, why don't you just protest peacefully? And it's like Martin Luther King protested peacefully, and he got murdered for it. And we think of these like very horrific acts that have been committed at the hands of a variety of people throughout history to all different racial groups. I mean, we even think of in Seattle, we think of, you know, the Japanese and the history there, which is horrible. We think of the Chinese and the history in building the railroad, which was pretty much slavery. We think of even subset racial groups or white racial groups being subjected to extreme, difficult, and harsh situations by way of those who were, quote unquote, and oh, there I go, quote unquote, superior.
I did it earlier already. I did it earlier.
Okay.
So
yeah, it's just a fascinating thing. I mean, it's endlessly deep, and to just try to peg it to this corner of the room and act like that's the only thing that's happening without recognizing what's happening, not only the room that you're in, but the space in which the room exists, which is infinite. It is a deep process.
Like somehow the first time it occurred to someone, like the fall of consciousness, that I could have power over somebody else, whatever it was based on, just that I could, because I was stronger, because I had more money, or, you know, like back in the evolution of human consciousness.
Yeah.
The first time the fall of consciousness from that state of equity consciousness, if you will, I can have power over this person. I can dominate them, and therefore, you know, like not have to suffer, get every one of my needs met, get what I want all the time.
Yeah. I would say something, but I'll save that for another time. I would need Dr. Will Coleman to deconstruct what I would say.
Biblical?
Yeah, because you know that we've also created this superior, inferior dyad by way of gender, by saying, and many people will revert back to, well, if she didn't eat that apple in the Garden of Eden, and therefore it's then pegging the downfall of humanity because a woman identified in a book ate an apple from a talking snake, and the man who gave his rib for her to be. And so that's another way that we've participated in this superior, inferior, and pointing at, well, if this, then that. And
right.
If you would have, then this would have. And completely relinquishing responsibility for what you're doing right now.
Yeah. I think he would say something to the effect of, and he'd always tell me if I'm wrong, but it was the idea of Adam. There was actually an androgynous consciousness that story is about, an androgynous consciousness, not man and woman.
Right.
But we've interpreted, well, as you said, the Bible's been weaponized plenty of times.
Yes. Yeah.
I love at the end of that section, Jeffon, I love too when he said about that study and the PTSS and traumatized people and all that the author of that book, Joy DeGruy, he says, the author, Kendi, says, so that book, widely taken as scientific fact, these sweeping generalizations were based on the author's interviews with all 25 subjects. 25.
Yeah, I mean, we could shape anything we want with 25 subjects.
Give me 25, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, you're not it. You're not qualified. Are you going to say what I want you to say? Okay, you're not qualified.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Excuse me. That wasn't Joy DeGruy. That was Lionel Ove's the book Mark of Oppression, a psychological study of the American Negro. Forgive me, that was a different book. Well, by 2 different authors.
25.
Anyway, yeah.
I get the point. So somebody said Blacks are traumatized as a culture versus some individual Blacks can be traumatized. One is a story, one is real. Both Blacks and whites buy into the story. Blacks are traumatized as a culture versus some Blacks can be traumatized.
Is the story that Blacks are traumatized as a culture? Was that the end of the point? And that what's real is that individuals?
One is a story and one is real. So I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, who sent this, the Confident Settler, some individual Blacks can be traumatized. Is that what you are referring to as real? And then Blacks are traumatized as a culture, which would then be a cultural racism, right? We talked about that last week around the idea that, okay, well, if you're a part of this culture, then that's applicable to your story in this culture.
And that's why I would interpret that comment as that one's the story, whereas individuals can be. And then would perpetuate the story.
Right.
White or Black. That's how. And yeah, if we're missing the mark on that, by all means, let us know, Confident Settler. But
please,
I think that's what Dr. Kendi's saying as well, though. I mean, it seems to kind of mirror that.
So, Rev Charles, what I'm going to do, since we have 12 minutes, I'm going to touch upon 3 slides, and then can we circle back and kind of have a final discussion about?
I will be quiet. I will be quiet.
And I will speak quickly. No. So on page 98, 99, the burden of letting down the entire race he was speaking of, our mistakes, and he's speaking from his point as a young black man at that time, were generalized as the mistakes of the race. It seemed that white people were free to misbehave and make mistakes. But if we failed to be twice as good, then the Black judge within themselves handed down the sentence. We were either king's disciples or killing king's dreams. And then when he went into this international, I don't know how to say baccalaureate.
Baccalaureate.
I shaped myself according to what I thought they believed about me. So in his idea of entering into that, he molded himself into the belief that the outside world was telling him who he was. That is something that I've experienced in a deep level. It's like being this chameleon and never really being authentic. And once you are willing to admit that to yourself and then take the steps to being authentic, it's as if like the foundation that is already crumbling is suddenly removed and you're standing upon something that has always been there, which is your true self.
That's right. Amen.
So not until his senior year of college did he realize he was a fool for thinking he was a fool. I like that. I was a fool for thinking I was a fool.
That's self-awareness.
Yeah, it is. I think we all could agree to some level there. And then standardized tests, the achievement gap in Black intellectual inferiority, there was a lot there. So that's the one that I kind of want to circle back to. But before I do, there's this last thing here. So he was basically saying, only if I would have spent more time listening to King instead of all the adults who claim to speak for him, The yellow is what Martin Luther King said. We must no longer be ashamed of being Black. And as long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. Then he takes it on to say, as long as the mind thinks that there is something behaviorally wrong with a racial group, the mind can never be anti-racist. As long as the mind oppresses the oppressed by thinking their oppressive environment has retarded their behavior, the mind can never be anti-racist. As long as the mind is racist, the mind can never be free. And therefore, the concept of anti-racism is to think nothing is behaviorally wrong or right, inferior or superior with any racial groups. Behavior is something humans do, not that races do. So that's a variety of things, and we can kind of pick apart little pieces. I think that standardized test is something that is very applicable for our time and brought a lot out for me.
You want to start with that then?
If that's okay.
Go for it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, there was a point where he was mentioning the privilege that he had to be able to go to these particular tutors and sessions that were pretty much housed or in wealthy or white or Asian communities, which I think we can agree. If we go drive around certain environments, certain communities, we could probably say, okay, there's tutoring here. Whereas in Black communities, a lot of Black communities, not all of them, but it's not available. And I was thinking about my upbringing in an affluent part of Salt Lake and the things that were available to everybody, for most of us, though I didn't take part in a lot of them. I was irresponsible at that time. In comparison to some of my friends who grew up in different areas where that was not applicable. And then the standardized testing as a way of continuing to create this gap, this achievement gap. And in doing so, creating it, these people are intellectually inferior. And we saw in this chapter how it's been built upon studies that were focusing on things that they wanted to prove, which was white superiority. And then in current times now, Asians can be up there in mathematics and science and things of that sort, but still the Latinx community and the Black community is looked down upon on this racial hierarchy, not for everybody, but just in general, particularly when we're talking about an educational system that has policies that perpetuate the inequities and inequalities that we've been speaking about.
Yeah, I love that. I also appreciate when he was talking about the actual tutor, and they're paying. What is he paying? Something like because he paid $1,000 for this tutor, and he said he normally would go to the gym afterward, and he's like, the people that could lift the most, it wasn't because they were stronger, because they had the right form and technique, and so his money gave him access to learning the technique to pass the test. Not to be strong, it was just, you're not learning more, you're learning how the technique to pass it, but you have to have access to that,
right,
in order to learn that. And, it makes me think a little bit, I'm certainly, Julia, my parenting partner, has a lot more experience with public education. We intentionally put my daughter into a public school here in the Valley that's got a bilingual program. And, it's mandated that public schools provide food for the students. And so we tried it. We're going to let's go see what food's available. This doesn't have to do with testing. I think it has to do with access and what's provided. So we went and picked up the food, and it's not the stuff that we choose to feed our daughter. And I'm so blessed and grateful that we have the resources. I'm so blessed and grateful every day that we have the resources to buy organic produce, mostly organic products, things like that, things that we deem healthy for our bodies, our child's body. And the lunches that we picked up for the week were not healthy. They were not healthy. And it almost makes me want to do a study, like, the Coachella Valley's it's got to be one of the wealthier spots in the country. As far as I think, I still don't know the Valley, but I think, it occurs to me there's plenty of money here. And I just wonder, even in like poorer neighborhoods and poorer places, like just the access that we're providing. And is it, I almost want to go to other schools in different places in the Valley and see if they provide the same lunches, or does it have anything? So an assumption I made is it has something to do with, I think my daughter she's 25% Mexican, and so 75% white, Caucasian. An assumption I made is somehow that has something to do with her being a minority in this school that's mostly Latino, Latinx as it's called. That's an assumption I've made. So it's actually, it's some research that I need to do, but I know that schools in other places, I mean, don't have access to much of anything. So I just think, and one of the things I want to go back to this, you made this statement, Jeffon, or how?
We're good. We have a few minutes.
I want to go back to this, Jeffon. What was it? It was on one of your slides. Oh, politics determine the success of groups, and it is racist power that creates the policies that cause racial inequities. And that goes back to the access for, SAT and why people have called the SAT racist for so long, and what he attempts to illuminate here. Maybe I'm choosing too many words to try and share what I'm sharing, but again, it has so much to do with access,
right?
Which has to do with economics, which has to do with policy. And I don't have anything else to say on that right now. I hope something I'm saying makes even a little bit of sense.
It does. And on the bottom of page 103, he's ultimately saying, in Pennsylvania, a recent statewide study found that at any given poverty level, districts with a higher portion of white students receive significantly more funding than districts with more students of color. The chronic underfunding of Black schools in Mississippi is a gruesome sight to behold. Schools lack basic supplies, basic textbooks, healthy food and water, and the lack of resources leads directly to diminished opportunities for learning. In other words, the racial problem is the opportunity gap, as anti-racist reformers call it, not the achievement gap.
There you go. I think that sums it up pretty well, man. And that is a rabbit hole that we could keep going down. We could do, this was enlightening for me. I've heard for a long time how the SAT and some of those standardized testings were racist. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this kind of helped put another piece to the puzzle together for me about how that shows up.
And it's like that, if that is the thing that prevents individuals from being accepted into prestigious schools or a lot of schools, and your mind, you don't have that form down. And then even if you do get into a school and that foundation isn't built, then it's easy for you not to succeed in the next step or the next stage. It's a fascinating.
I got an 880 on my full disclosure. I got an 880 on my SATs, gang. So I don't know where that stacks up, but I know it is definitely in the zone of mediocrity.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. Well, as always, Rev Charles, this is a really great conversation, and this chapter had a lot to talk about, and so we kind of bounced around. But everybody who's chiming in and sharing and listening and commenting, thank you all for your willingness to stick with us as we go through this. Yeah, right on. Thank you for sticking with it too. Well, as we say every week, as I feel every week, I appreciate you and your willingness to dive in, and I continue to be aware that it's a messy process, but making something can be a messy process, and it's okay. And we keep doing it, and we keep having it. And anybody that's getting good at anything is going to stumble from time to time, and is going to have great moments from time to time. So, hey, for all of us, let's just continue to be committed to the work, the practice. And maybe we should not punt what we were talking about, but let us individually maybe engage in a practice where we identify ways that we are participating in behavioral racism, and catch ourselves when we categorize an entire group of people because of one individual, whether it's racial or whether it's not, whether it's political or whether it's religious or whatever you choose to find it. But recognize those barriers and those ways in which you've prevented bridges from being built because of the way you're choosing to see things. I will do that from my end, and report back with a laundry list for you next week.
Amen. Cool. Well, hopefully your list is so long that we don't need to get to my list then. I'll put my list together too. I mean, it's probably every one of them. Everyone we've ever heard of, it's probably every one of them.
Yeah.
Anything that and we just want to keep getting better. So right on. Thank you, Jeffon, so much.
Yes. Thank you, brother.
You're my brother, and I feel you. Let's see. Couple of announcements real quick, and then I'll formally say goodbye to Jeffon, and he can formally say good week to all of us. We continue to welcome your financial contributions. Thank you so much, community and beyond, for being willing to share your financial good with Center for Spiritual Living Palm Desert. It continues to allow us to keep the building in shape, keep our spiritual sustenance alive and vital by these programs, other things that we're offering and doing, the salaries of our staff, and just continuing to nurture our community in the way that it's been nurtured for 47 years, 46, 47 years, almost 50 years. And what a humble blessing it is for me to participate with that legacy, that lineage. So thank you, community, for continuing to support this community in the way that you have for almost half a century. What a gift and a blessing and an extraordinary thing. There's a tab where you can, I think it says click here to give. Something makes it very easy for you to give right here on our YouTube page or the website, whatever platform. I know it's right there for you. Let's see, tomorrow we have our Sensational Six, our 6 new reverends. There'll be another offering for you. Thursday, my guest is Harold Payne, multi-platinum selling artist, songwriter, singer. He's worked with all sorts of folks, and he's a motivational. And it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for me to have an interview with him. We're going to be talking a little bit later today to do some pregame. So I'm excited to get to know him better and then to offer him. Many of you maybe already know him. Being new to the community, I'm excited to get to know him and then see what we'll package together for you on Thursday. Friday, Life on Love with me. We'll see what kind of cool things I have up my sleeve. They're a little bit short right now, so I'll see if I can cram some stuff in there. Saturday, another wonderful meditation at 10. And then Sunday, our Sunday service, which is sure to be another magnificent service. The CSL House Band joins me this Sunday for the music aspect of our service. Let's see. We'll report back on and that says, yes, visit the East Valley. Okay, understood. We'll report back on Black Thought and the invitation. We appreciate that. DJ, thank you guys as usual. Very interesting talk. And Confident Settler says thank you. So, Jeffon, why don't you give us the final word today?
Yeah, I think as always, it's just a really great honor and privilege for all of us to be together in the ethers of the Zoom world or internet world, and being able to have these conversations that can continue to push us forward and recognize the good that we can do in the world by way of resolving things that often lie behind the veil, which are dwelling deep within ourselves. And the degree to which we do that is the degree to which we can cause new effects in this reality that we are so blessed to be able to live. So with that, I appreciate everything. And always, Rev Charles, thank you. CSL Palm Desert community, many blessings to all of you.